Senator D'Amato leads the charge in Congress to block U.S. troops on the Golan.
Will Soviet immigrant aid money go to fund the Golan pullout?
Arafat's Jerusalem jihad.
This and more tonight on the JNN Evening News.
From JNN in New York, Caroline Greenberg, Howard Barbanel, the JNN Evening News.
I'm Howard Barbanel.
And I'm Caroline Greenberg, and here's what's happening. Jerusalem is the hot button. While visiting South Africa for Nelson Mandela's inauguration, PLO chief Yasser Arafat, speaking in English in a mosque, declared that the jihad will continue and urged those listening to come and fight a jihad to liberate Jerusalem. Most dictionaries define jihad as a holy war or a bitter crusade.
Arafat also told those at the mosque that the recent Cairo Accords aren't worth the paper they're written on, comparing his recent agreement with Israel with one Muhammad made and violently broke after just 1 year.
Foreign Minister Shimon accepts Arafat's rationalization that a jihad can be peaceful and about peace. Meanwhile, Faisal Husseini, the PLO leader in Jerusalem, said recently in Arabic that our goal is to bring about the dissolution of the Zionist entity gradually.
In a major political scandal the Israeli government covered up, then denied the existence of, then finally admitted that Foreign Minister Peres sent a letter to his Norwegian counterpart last October promising that Israel would not hamper the activity of Palestinian Arab political institutions in Jerusalem. The Israeli media had a field day blasting the government for its lack of credibility and for compromising Jerusalem.
Not mincing words, Jerusalem Mayor Ehud Olmert had this to say recently on the Charlie Rose program on PBS about Jerusalem and the peace process.
It all starts with Jerusalem. Jerusalem is always underneath everything that they say. It's not that there is an orderly procession of items, you know, you settle one, you go to the other, you settle the third, you go to the fourth, and finally you come to Jerusalem. They want Jerusalem because if they want Jerusalem, if they get Jerusalem, in their perception, they break up the foundations of Jewish existence. And that's why we can't afford to make any concession about Jerusalem.
Do you believe that's the reason?
Absolutely.
They want Jerusalem, not because they want it for what it represents to them,
no,
but because it represents a breaking up of the Jewish civilization.
Absolutely, because if they are only interested in religious aspects, and if they are only interested in having the rights of the Muslims guaranteed and protected religiously, then they have it. They have it in a manner that is exemplary in human history. I want to remind you something which you may not be aware of.
Probably.
Temple Mount. Temple Mount is the most important sacred place for Jews. This is where the temple of the Jewish people was thousands of years ago. Now, over the years, at the time when the Muslims took over Jerusalem, they built two very important mosques. One is the Al-Aqsa, and one is the Dome of the Rock. Now, in 1967, when Israel took over Jerusalem and united it, we voluntarily decided that Jews will not be allowed to pray on Temple Mount. We have limited the rights of Jews in the most sacred place for Judaism in order to avoid conflicts, confrontation, and possible violence in a place which has become, over the years, also extremely important for the Muslims. So, by every standard, we are protecting, in a most dignified way, the rights of the Muslims, religious rights, in Jerusalem, in the Temple Mount. It has nothing to do with politics. When we talk about political solutions, what basically is implied from this argument is that wherever there is a national minority, you have to split this place. And this is entirely unacceptable. There are many places in the world where there are national minorities. This is one of them, Jerusalem. There is a majority of Jews, and by the way, the majority of Jews has been there for over now 150 years, so this is not a new phenomenon. And the Muslims' rights will be protected.
Olmert was equally emphatic at the recent Jerusalem Reclamation Project dinner here in New York.
I came from Jerusalem tonight to share with you our confidence and determination that Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish people, will remain forever united and undivided as our exclusive capital.
On the subject of a possible visit by Yasser Arafat to Jerusalem, Olmert had this to say.
And I say to the Prime Minister and the government of Israel that in spite of our commitment to keep all the holy places free for all believers, as we have proved to do in the last 27 years, and we will continue to do in the future, in spite of our deep commitment for religious freedom in our great city, which has a great tradition, this time we will not allow Arafat to set his foot on Temple Mount, where from he will want to declare the jihad over Jerusalem and the Jewish people. We respect the religious emotions of everyone. We do not respect those who want to wage war in Jerusalem, against Jerusalem, and to divide the city. Those who want to use their holy places not for a genuine, pure expression of religious feeling, but for a political demonstration against the city, should not be allowed to be there. And I guarantee you, Arafat will not be there. We will not let him in. Thank God, we are in charge of Jerusalem, and we will remain in charge of Jerusalem, and no one will threaten it.
Deputy Foreign Minister Yossi Beilin has a plan to divide Jerusalem into autonomous zones for the Arabs, with UN checkpoints separating Arabs from Jews. Jerusalem is very much on the agenda for negotiations between the PLO and Israel over the next 2 years. Passions on Jerusalem and the territories are running high in the Jewish community here. At a major concert and rally following the Salute to Israel parade, addressing a crowd of at least 50,000, member of Knesset General Ariel Sharon had this to say.
Jerusalem is at stake. Remember that. Arafat calls for the occupation of Jerusalem. I call you to defend Jerusalem. I call you to make Aliyah, to come to Jerusalem and live in Jerusalem. I am calling for positive, constructive Jewish jihad to defend and settle Jerusalem. I call upon you to strengthen the Jewish settlement in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, in the Golan Heights, in the Jordan Valley. That is the last line of defense that the Jewish people are having against being pushed back to the 1948 borders, which are indefensible borders. The Jewish communities there are under boycott by a Jewish government in Jerusalem. The Jews are not under any boycott. Not here, not in New York, not in Los Angeles, not in Sydney, in Australia, not in Tokyo, not in Moscow, one place where Jews are under boycott. Jews under boycott now in the Golan Heights, in Samaria, in Judea, in Gaza, in the Jordan Valley.
45 Israelis have been killed in terrorist acts from September 13, 1993 to April 21st of this year. On May 17th, 2 Jews were killed by Hamas in Hebron and 2 soldiers murdered in Gaza on May 20th. Countless others have been wounded. The government calls these people victims of peace and predicts terrorism to continue for the indefinite future.
According to the Israeli newspaper Al-Hamishmar, Arafat's Palestinian policemen from Jericho have been wandering the territories and Jerusalem without asking permission or checking in with anybody. Is this sightseeing or espionage? IDF spokesman said they were upset the policemen were wandering around without permission, but that if they asked for permission, it would be granted.
Congressman Rick Lazio of Long Island, a member of the House Banking Committee, revealed that the Rabin government is holding talks on Capitol Hill to divert at least half of the $10 billion in U.S. loan guarantee funds towards cash compensation for Golan Heights residents for leaving their homes and farms. The funds were originally slated to help absorb Soviet and Ethiopian immigrants. Highway construction and other capital projects have absorbed much of over the $2 billion used already. Immigrant activists have called this a major sellout. Immigration from the former Soviet Union has been declining steadily over the past 2 years.
Recent Israeli opinion polls haven't looked good for the government. A new Yediot Achronot poll shows that nearly 2/3 of the public oppose taking the next scheduled step of negotiating the extension of Palestinian self-rule throughout the territories. Another poll shows that 62% of those surveyed believing that the prospects for peace with the Arabs, even after the signing of the Cairo Accords, is either low or non-existent. Quoted in Al-Hamishmar, Shimon Peres said that the government needs to do the right thing, even if it's not popular. On Charlie Rose, Peres said he wasn't interested in the mood of the people.
I'm more concerned about the leaders than about the people. I think a determined leadership that will act as they should will find that the people are following them. You know, in leadership, you must make a choice. What do you want? To have daily a nice poll, or you want to have historically a nice cut? A government, after all, is not a hospital. You don't have to take the temperature every morning of all the sick people. You have 4 years. In the 4 years, you have to make a historic move. And the people will feel that you are courageous enough, determined enough, they will give you their support.
A majority of Israelis polled are flatly against a Golan withdrawal. The Rabin government has been pushing the idea of stationing at least 1,000 U.S. troops on the Heights to secure an agreement. Leading the effort in the Senate against U.S. troops on the Golan is New York Senator Al D'Amato. D'Amato says the Golan is not Sinai, and Hafez Assad is not Anwar Sadat. I trust Assad even less than Saddam Hussein. He's smarter, more dangerous, and more cunning. D'Amato asserts that American soldiers would be easy prey for Islamic terrorists. The senator quotes Golda Meir, who said, "No American boy should die for Israel. We only want the means to defend ourselves." Finally, the senator asserts if U.S. troops have to secure a peace, then the peace itself is not very secure.
A good deal of time has gone by since the 1967 and 1973 wars. We have this report on those two conflicts to help put the issue of the Golan Heights in perspective.
Up until 25 years ago, it was called the Syrian Heights, overpowering, threatening. It was from this point that the settlements below were bombed. Time after time, people waited in the bomb shelters for the all-clear signal over the radio. The worried-filled eyes were the best way to understand what life was like when the Heights were in Syrian hands. The kibbutz was a disaster. The cowsheds were destroyed. The children's houses were destroyed. There was no electricity or water. It was the first time a civilian settlement in Israel was bombed without being at war. The Six-Day War broke out in 1967. A delegation of settlements in the valley went up to Jerusalem to demand that the government rid us of the nightmare of the Syrian Heights. Only on the 4th day of the war was the decision taken to go up to the Heights. Within 2 days, the nightmare turned into a feeling of freedom. Yom Kippur 1973, war again. the Syrian army surprise attacked the Golan Heights. The purpose was the Jordan River and the northern part of Israel. You get the feeling that the row of tanks has no end. There were only 3 tanks left in our sector. The platoon leader was wounded in the back, and he said, "Guys, there are only 3 of us left. Give it your all. Stay awake and wait, and if something happens, start shooting." Within a day and a half, the Syrian army had control over the area marked in red. Without the Golan Heights, Safed, Tiberias, and the upper tip of the Galilee would have fallen.
Joining us to discuss the peace process are Dr. Ken Kelner, who's a founding member of the Coalition for Israel, National Public Affairs Chairman of the Zionist Organization and National Vice President for Public Relations of the Likud USA, and Jeff Weisenfield, who is the Executive Assistant to Senator Al D'Amato in New York. First off, Jeff, why no U.S. troops on the Golan, and what about the billions Israel is asking to pay for a Golan pullout?
Well, the entire premise is one that we have to be concerned about. The public is fickle and doesn't seem to have the patience and countenance, especially in light of recent military adventures overseas, for American casualties and body bags returning here. And I'm not trying on behalf of the Senator or myself to arouse undue alarm, but the fact of the matter is that if that occurs, all you need is a terrorist attack against some of our soldiers. They'll be brought back. You'll have no troops and no Golan, and where does that leave Israel? As for the financial aspect, it's a little premature to talk dollars and cents. Right now, as much as the Israeli government is moving forward with this idea, we as Americans are now discussing it in the public venue, and let's see where it takes us.
Now tell me, who is opposed to U.S. troops on the Golan Heights? Is it just right-wing American Jews and Senator D'Amato? And why should all Americans be concerned about this?
There's an unnamed Senate staffer who was quoted by the JTA who said that this was D'Amato's smokescreen on behalf of right-wing Jews. This is not good for Israel, and it's not good for the United States. And there's great reason to be concerned for so many citizens of Israel. And yes, the residents of Judea, Samaria, and the Golan are citizens of Israel. And they do feel left out in the lurch. They went there as pioneers for Eretz Yisrael, and now they don't know where they stand.
Ken, some say that many American Jews are being a bit holier than the Pope in their zeal to retain the Golan Heights for Israel. What is it that this Israeli government just doesn't see about the Golan issue, and what are some of the compelling reasons to keep the Golan in Israel's hands?
Well, Howard, I think that what the Israeli government doesn't see is that this particular enemy, Syria, is an autocratic and brittle regime that inevitably will fall, if not due to the fact that Assad is a very aging man and a man who is ill at this point, that he will fall because of the rivalries within his own government. And I think that what the current Israeli government seems to believe is that because of their socialist philosophy, in which they are deeply embedded, they believe that the world can basically live by universalist utopian principles that will allow them to live as brothers with all mankind. And while all American Jews and all decent people wish for that kind of a world, I think that some of us who were brought up in a more capitalist, if you will, tradition, believe that not all of our wishes can come true. Reasons for not giving up the Golan Heights are many. We all know that the history of the Golan includes numerous assaults on Israel prior to 1967 by the Syrians when they were in those positions. We know that peacekeepers in the Sinai were swept aside just before the 1967 war. And we also know that much of Israel's water comes from the Golan Heights and that it cannot afford to give up those water resources.
Dr. Kelner, the U.S. is committed to $500 million in aid to the PLO over the next 2 years. Is this a good investment for America, and should our foreign aid money go to funding the PLO?
The PLO remains an unreconstructed terrorist organization bent on Israel's destruction, as witnessed by Arafat's recent statements in South Africa, in which he called for a jihad against Israel, and called and said that breaking agreements with Israel was legitimate. I think that when the United States offers to give $500 million to Arafat, it therefore helps to mobilize a worldwide effort to bring even more funds to the PLO. And as we know, most of the other nations around the world have thus far not honored their pledges to give money to the PLO. They are waiting for the United States to do so. Many groups are now working, the Zionist Organization of America in particular is working to try to keep that aid from being allocated. And many senators and congressmen have already agreed to be co-sponsors of the legislation that will block that aid. It's going to be voted on in July, in all probability. If you want to oppose this, you should call the Congress at 202-224-3121 and demonstrate that you are against the idea of sending American taxes to fund a terrorist organization.
Jeff, there's been a lot of talk about increased terrorism. Is there an answer to this cycle of violence other than outright capitulation to the PLO?
One thing we know for certain, just this past week there were two very seminal articles in the New York Times by Ruth Wiss and by William Safire that discuss how the Arabs react to what is perceived to be capitulation by Israel. These are not philosophical questions, these are very basic questions. Ambassador Jerejian, who just resigned, said that we have to build a constituency for peace in the Arab world. No matter how much we will do that in our small way, in a very big way, the Arab dictators continue to promote and build a constituency for war and for hatred against Jews and Israel. We were in a much stronger position before September 13th. It is obvious to us now, and this is not a philosophical question, as I have said, that we are being looked upon in Israel, the Jewish people, as being weak, and I wonder if perhaps we've lost our way. You know, Shimon Peres, and it's not my place nor the senator's place to criticize Israeli officials, but I believe a line was crossed, and it tells us something about the philosophy of the government there. Shimon Peres compares the Hiroshima bombing, where we tried to limit the war, to the Nazi Holocaust and the elimination of European Jewry. And of course, he takes Arafat for his word that he meant a jihad for peace. We've lost our way.
Dr. Kelner, Shimon Peres says that in today's age of missile warfare, territories, land, and boundaries mean nothing. Is he naive?
Well, the world has never witnessed any example of any nation being conquered by missiles or by air warfare. In the end, although those are indispensable tools of modern battle, the real issue is who occupies the land. And what we know is that Israel lacks strategic depth, that to the extent that it has any strategic depth at all for its most populated coastal area, that that strategic depth exists in the West Bank, otherwise known as Judea and Samaria. If we are going to protect Israel's survival, and we should keep in mind that there are mountains that overlook that coastal plain that run along the Jordan River, then it seems to me inconceivable that Israel is going to be able to protect itself without retaining those territories.
Jeff, how do the Jews living in Judea, Samaria, Gaza, and the Golan plan to survive this peace process? Are they losing heart? The government plans early empowerment for the PLO throughout Judea and Samaria, and what, if anything, can be done by American Jews and the government and our own government to ensure the survival of the communities there?
Well, American Jews have to, as they always have, make their voices heard. Those people are definitely disheartened. They don't know what the future holds for them. They've been sent there by the government of Israel as pioneers to settle all of the land of Israel, Judea, Samaria, and the Golan. When we say we're waiting for peace and we're embarking upon peace, does not peace mean a fear of freedom from the fear of violence against one's person, against one's property, and against one's family? Clearly, if there is to be a peace and a withdrawal from some of those territories, I do not see how those people who remain in those lands, which are historical Jewish lands and where they have at least the same right, if not more than anyone else, as this is argued in the public discourse, How can they feel safe in that kind of situation?
Jeff, Ken, thanks for joining us tonight.
We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me, Howard. This program, like all of the programs that Young Leadership Likud is doing, is extremely helpful to the fight to help preserve Israel.
We'd like to thank you for joining us again tonight. If you'd like a copy of this program or more information on how you can get more involved with these issues, stay tuned, and our address and phone number will follow.
For Caroline and everyone here at JNN, I'm Howard Barbanel, thanking you for letting us share a piece of our world with yours.
See you here next time.
Good night.
הבית שלי, הדרך שלי, הליכוד זה נכון. העתיד שלי, הביטחון שלי, הליכוד זה נכון. בדרך שלנו נביא השלום, בנייה עלייה, הגשמת החלום. כולנו היחד, כל אחד לחוד, יודעים שזה נכון, זה הליכוד. הליכוד הוא בלב, הליכוד הוא בראש, הליכוד זה נכון. רק אחד יכול, מול כל השמאל, הליכוד זה נכון. הליכוד הוא בלב, הליכוד הוא בראש, הליכוד זה נכון. רק אחד יכול, מול כל השמאל, הליכוד, הליכוד זה נכון.